Okay, you guys, we're out live. So just watch your language. Okay, you guys, we're out live. So just watch your language. Okay, you guys, we're out live. So just watch your language. Okay, you guys, we're out live. Okay.
It's almost my car. Came for the stuffs.
Turns it on. All right, anyone online out there in TV land? This is a testing 1, 2, 3, testing 1 through 3, 1 through 3, and 1, 2, 3. And we need feedback as to whether you have sound or not. So if you see us flapping our gums, say something about it. So welcome everyone to the Golden Eagle discussion or discourses. Golden Eagle will be with us momentarily. Our good friend Melody has received a gift of a travel trailer to help her and her family trying to reconnect before the holidays, and of course they delivered it at 7:30 at night, because that's what you do in the mountains when you have nothing better to do but receive trailers in the middle of the night. So this discussion is specifically geared towards the watching of the movie The Matrix. So tonight was a movie night, and those of us here locally get together and watched the movie The Matrix. If you haven't watched the movie ever, you need to do that. If you have and not done it recently or done it with the intent of connecting on a higher essence with the material, then you also would be advised to do that in your leisure, and then come back and watch this discussion. Otherwise, you're welcome to contribute, and we're going to be talking about some of the higher esoteric symbolism and so forth that we all experienced while watching this movie. So, with that in mind, I'm going to just start with a couple of my notes, and then we can talk about that as a group, and go from there, because they're kind of in order. So one of the first triggers that I saw was when they went into that one particular building that had, it wasn't really a spiral, but it had the staircase, and you would see the image looking down through the staircase, is that there was a black and white checkerboarded floor. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what to say about that other than the fact that we see checkerboarded floors a lot in esoteric symbolism. And so if in fact the screenwriters for the show weren't consciously engaged in creating a higher level esoteric movie, then why did they choose the checkerboarded floor? And then we also noticed the checkerboarded floor again when the two cats walked by, and that was a trigger for Nemo to start realizing that there was a glitch in the program. He caught that, and that was one of his awakening moments, was to kind of see that.
Nothing's black and white.
What's that?
The black and white checkered, nothing's black and white.
What does that mean?
Well, nothing is completely black, as the saying goes, or nothing's white, there's gray.
Usually all shades of gray. Although it may well be on spiritual levels, maybe in the physical plane, in our mundane existence, nothing's black and white, but there clearly is good and evil on the spiritual levels.
Right. Now, good and evil is one thing. I mean, we have this checkerboard table here. We tend to think of black and white as good and evil. And yet, when two players sit down to play chess at the checkerboard, they have to determine who's going to be the light pieces and who's going to be the dark pieces. So in one way, there's no game if you don't have an opponent. And so in some circles, what you might look at with that is the fact that without some kind of obstacles in our way, would we really push ourselves to be better people or to do the right thing? If everything just came to us easily and there's no, adversary, there's no conflict, there's no nothing to overcome, then then it doesn't seem to be much of a game, right? So that's
Exactly.
one thing that I just have noticed because I do a lot of research on. I was going for my PhD in art history with an emphasis in religious symbolism. So I see patterns, and I've looked at a lot of ancient art, and this checkerboarded floor goes clear back to Greek, if not all the way back to Egyptian times.
Wow.
So it was just one of the things that I clocked that okay, whether they were conscious of what they were doing in the time or not, they picked something that has a lot of really ancient symbolism to it.
And it looked mosaic, and it's like back through time they've always done mosaics, and it's you got to piece things together.
So one sign. I did note right before I saw the checkerboarded table, I had kicked on my Akadua, not table, the floor. I had kicked on my Akadua with my sensing to stock the movie and kind of say, okay, what do I need to see? And the first thing I noticed is all the rain. There was just all this water and just like pouring off of stuff. And that is the trigger that woke me up. And I doubt that I would have missed the checkerboard floor, but that came up right afterwards for me.
I think one of the interesting things around that time period, when he meets Morpheus and he takes the red pill, he notices the mirror. And for me, that looked a lot like the dreamer's stare.
Yeah.
Looking and watching things just kind of morph right in front of your eyes. And as he put his hand to the mirror, and his hand became one with the mirror, it's almost like looking into the mirror of your own soul as you merged in with the mirror.
Do any of you really know the significance of Zion or Sion?
I know it goes back before biblical times. Zionism was part of the movement happening at the time of Jesus, but I don't really know the details.
Yeah. Anyone else? So yeah, it's a term basically that's referring to the perfected world that when Christ returns the second time will be. You remember how they referred to it as the first program that they ran for the Matrix was supposed to be this utopia, this those things that we've been talking about manifesting in a community and the Tolteca philosophy of just being in this utopia's paradise kind of situation. And the scriptures were promised 1,000 years of peace after Christ's return, but there's going to be some conflict, obviously, when he returns. So there's several different places that this word comes up. Obviously, it's scriptural, and it's referring to some of that. But it's also, how many of you saw the Da Vinci Code? So the bad guys in the Da Vinci Code are the Priory of Sion. And so it's not just a fictitious part of that movie. It's referring to a group that has been all along, from the time of Christ up through the Middle Ages, fighting to protect and hide something. Now, I don't claim to know everything there is about the Priory of Sion, but that is another place that it's referred to. And then, for example, there's some religious groups, there's Zion's Canyon in southern Utah, which is a big national park, which is really beautiful, worth the trip to go see and everything. It's really impressive. But the local Mormons named it that because of its beauty and how it references this time, that's supposed to come in the future. So anyway, there's a lot of different references to it, and I just wondered if any of you really knew much about it. So there is significance then to the fact that a supposedly fictional action adventure movie would choose that as the name of their utopia spot, you know, where their people were and where they're trying to get back to and what they're trying to save and preserve is this last human city. So in one way you can kind of look at that. If there's a huge amount of destruction that comes with the return of Christ and a good portion of the evil people in the world are wiped off the face of the earth or translated up or whatever, that there very easily could just be, you know, a last surviving city that, you know, is able to maintain that kind of sense. The next comment, and if you guys have notes as because I'm going through my notes in order, but if you have something related to this or, you know, that you want to throw in between, just pipe up. The practice room, when he starts learning how to do the different martial arts, and you can kind of see at the end when he finally clicked into his mode, that he went back to, instead of just doing punches and all that stuff, he really went into that almost Zen-like Qigong mode, where, yeah, his moves are lethal, but he was completely awake and completely in control during all of that. And so when he was in that practice room, I remember one of the things that was said is, okay, there's all the things that you could normally do with the martial arts, but essentially that rules can be bent and they can be broken.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you think that relates to some of our magical or shamanic work?
What's happening in the dreaming versus in a horizontal dreaming versus our vertical day-to-day waking dreaming? A lot of that stuff, once we master the tools and things in the dreaming, that we can carry it over to the day-to-day.
No, I think that whatever you see or whatever you want to do, that you can do, because there's no rules. And if there's a will, there's a way.
Hey, Melody?
Yeah.
We need you out here for instruction.
And
Position to this level. So,
that, you know, just because science or somebody's told you that can't happen or that's a solid table, it's not a solid table. It's just like when that little guru said, you know, you bend. So it's all bending the mind.
So yeah, I kind of agree with that. I think when they say that some can be bent, some can be broken, it's all about you, to use some terminology I'm becoming more acquainted with, you finding your own true will and living up to the potential of it. Because the limitations we experience are limitations that we put on ourselves.
Mhm.
That in the true spiritual and in the etheric, those limitations don't exist.
Right.
And the more and more that we bend the rules and break the rules, the more we go into our personal power. And we are able to transmute and shift and change things in our world. Much like he went from the place of being in the practice room and kind of getting, beaten up. And then in the final scene, he's standing there with one arm behind his back,
Right.
you know, barely moving a hand. But he's doing it in a way that he is fully in his power and exercising his true will.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's what defeats the darker side, the evil.
Right.
And that's what brings
Yeah.
freedom and light.
And what the
To
truth, sorry.
That's okay.
And what the truth is, there is no rules.
Right.
In the shamanic.
There is
realm.
no rules. Well,
There's laws,
yeah.
which are different,
Right.
but there's no rules.
Right. And really the key of that was the fact that there is no spoon. So we talk about this a lot, and yet how much do we really believe, you know, this is solid, okay? Well, what if it, you know, isn't solid? What if we can bend and move through this? I remember one time, it was one of the last really super powerful astral projection lucid dreams that I had. And I've had a lot over the years, but I tend to only have them when I move to a new home. It's almost like my essence wants to go up and kind of check things out and see what's going on. And so, in this particular case, I was in my room asleep, and I realized, you know, I was floating up off my bed, and I decided I was going to go out the window, but I was going through the glass, and and I remember this stretching and bending and popping sound as I went through. So it was very much like, you know, some of the things like when he was putting his hand through the mirror and
Right.
stuff. It felt exactly like that. And so it wasn't just, oh, I just flew out a window. There should have been a glass there. I should have broke it. But no, I actually felt going
Manipulated it.
through the glass. And so, you know, I think there's definitely something to that.
Mhm.
And so clearly, I think where you were going with it too, you know, that we can see that our own limitations are what hold us back.
Yeah.
You know, our own thought
rules.
processes. And I mean, it's been a long time since I saw this movie, so I didn't remember all the punchlines and stuff. But I remember, you know, the part about the oracle. And, you know, the way she set him up was that he needed at some point to believe in himself enough
Absolutely.
to do that. And once he did that, then it was pretty clear that he was the chosen one. Right?
Mhm.
But you see how sometimes we have to be tricked onto our path,
Mhm.
and how we need to sometimes only see a step or two ahead, because if we saw what we were, if Morpheus had said to him, "You are the chosen one. You got to save the world," you know, he's like, "I don't even know what you're talking about here." And so you get a little bit at a time. Choosing between the red and blue pill was his first like real big, but you know that he was already drawn to this. He was already looking. He was already out there, aware of something that was calling him. And so, you know, all of this is happening to us as well. We're, you know, and at some point then we take that red pill and things start opening up. And sometimes it's overwhelming, but, you know, so is the reality that we're leaving behind. The fact that, you know, we
Or
are in,
unreality.
yeah.
See, and it's all about bending. The entire movie, it's about bending in the mind
Mm.
and bending the rules, bending what society has taught you, what mom's taught you, you know, and you know, don't be careful of the table. You know, the corner you can hurt yourself and hit your head, you know, and things like that. And it's bending physics, bending this world. Bending reality, or what is reality. It's everything's bending. Is bending what you see, bending what you feel. I mean, yeah.
The
And
whole
it's
story of the
also-
one reed has to do with that it bends in the wind. It doesn't break. So when the wind stops, then it can pop back up
Right.
again. So, you know, in some ways we have, and this is what we're doing in the dreaming and in the Bardo, is we're navigating this. And if we try to be too rigid about it, then you know, we're gonna get squashed. But if we can almost dance with it, you know,
Right.
there's this movement that,
Like when you went out the window, you bent all kinds of things to do that.
right.
You know, if somebody would say, Bonnie, you could levitate and fly out the window, you would go, you know,
Mhm.
that's against physics. That's against rules of this world. But you bent it.
Mhm.
Bent a lot of things to do what you did.
Yeah.
It's defying physics, defying rules, or
So when
But
you,
it's also about what you believe and
Yeah.
all of that. Because when they went into that building, knowing, seeing the black cat twice, seeing the glitch in the matrix, and went up to the room where the kid was, the kid realized the window was now a wall. And he didn't have to accept that belief system, but he did.
Mm.
And so we can limit ourselves by accepting what we see in front of us as opposed to pushing those boundaries,
Right.
pushing those limits.
So if you think about the fact that in this movie, the physical reality is that these people are, enslaved and being fed off of.
Mm-hmm.
So everything that you see that they consider to be real is actually part of the projection.
Mm-hmm.
So here we're reacting to things in a projection based off of known data and what we are told. And so as long as we never question that data and we just, live those rules, those restrictions, that projection, we never realize how little we're actually utilizing of our real physical abilities. It doesn't even have to be superhuman abilities here. We're just talking about, what God gave us and how little of it we actually use.
Mm-hmm.
And the truth of that's verified by science when they say we use less than 10% of our brain. So we have access to so much more intelligence, knowingness, intention, beliefs than we are even familiar with. I mean, things as easy as healing yourself. Well, it doesn't seem easy when you don't know how to access it
Right.
all. But we're in that process of learning and also raising our vibration so we can connect it more with everything we have.
Yeah. One thing about the training module room is this is the kind of work examples that we get from EJ. That essentially he's got into the whole video gaming thing because it's just like a training module. It's like, okay, you got to get through the first level, and you can rush through that and get to the next level. But then if you didn't pick up all the tokens and things that you needed, all the tools and gifts that you were given in the first one, you may not have the tokens, the power, the whatever it is you need, the maps that you need to navigate when you get to that next level. So in that way, we can see that kind of correspondence to our spiritual path. So like you, for example, are on one level kind of rushing through the Akadua levels so that you're ready for the level 4. Now, you can do that by paying money and showing up, for the initiatory classes. But money isn't going to necessarily prepare you for, the class. And, so that's like
It's
years.
probably absolutely not.
Yeah, there's years worth of, experience and training and stuff that the work on self, that you want to be having put that time in. At the same time, part of what I sensed that was keeping you from continuing with the Akadu when you first got your level 1 and other things that have come up is that you haven't had the money for it. And so what has changed since you determined that you were going to do this?
A lot of it is, it's very funny we should say this, that we're talking about shifting belief systems and removing limitations. But a lot of it is I have since learned that as you take a step down the path, the universe works with you and opens things up.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. So I would go into things with, I'd really like to do this, but in a place of fear.
Yeah.
That what if I start to walk down this and I can't pay him?
Right.
What do I do then? Instead of just saying, I am gonna go with in grace and ease, and I am gonna know the universe is supporting me in this because it's part of the path I'm meant to be on.
Yeah.
And also the knowingness that the time is really coming where having this wisdom, having this knowledge, having this energy to be used for the benefit of all is so important.
Yeah.
And so even one person, and I don't have any grandiose ideas about who I am and what I can do, but even one person can make a difference as part of a collective. And so for me, it's sort of like a sense of, if I sit back, I'm wasting time. And now is the time for me to take action and move ahead.
You're
That's
being
good.
And
called.
be who I
You.
was always meant to be.
You're answering the call.
Yeah.
And it is true that, I had a dream once where I was in total darkness, but if I put one foot out and started to balance that weight forward where I was going to have to step on something or fall into the abyss, then the stepping stone would light up. And I'd put my foot on that and I'd start to balance the weight so that I could move the next foot forward, and then the next step would light up. And that lack of, like EJ says, it's okay to be afraid. It's not okay to panic. When we panic, then we're running away from what we're presented with. And I think Coyotes even said, you need to be afraid, or it's not like you're really doing anything. If it was easy, everybody would do it. So there needs to be this push against your threshold of your fear factors and so forth to get past that.
You're
But
pushing reality.
we have found, because we're basically off autopilot. What's that?
I'm gonna write some out for these gentlemen. Can I have a piece of paper?
Oh, okay. Do you have a piece of paper that you can have
Do you want to
on
do it?
every notebook, or?
It doesn't matter what size. He said I just gotta write that he received it.
Oh, you got it?
So we
My
wanna-
fingers are
I'm gonna keep
right.
talking to the audience, but basically, when you put all your trust in your guides and in your path and a belief in your will, and that there's nothing going to get in your way, things begin to shift. And, money comes out of nowhere, connections come out of nowhere. Our whole last year.
Trailer comes out of nowhere.
Exactly. Our whole last year, we had this great schedule of all these things we were going to do, and all of that went out the window, and yet better things came in to replace it. So there's definitely needs to be a space, a void that's created for things to come in. And, if we're always worrying about where our money is going to come from, then we're not really using that like we would the other four elements. We work with bringing in, if we look at the suits of and look at coins, and we have these mental aspects, we have these earthly aspects, we have all these different things, but that we work with, but we kind of just hope the money is going to show up, and we don't work that into the configuration, and so and things start to flow when you actually commit to it.
Yeah.
So, orbs in particular, EJ has what he calls orbs. And the idea is that you're kind of focusing on this one thing and running through. It's like it would be rushing through one of these simulations that Nemo was going through. And you see how he got these downloads. He just had to go through the simulation once and then he had it. Or like when Trinity needed the manual on how to fly the helicopter. It's just like, okay, she gets this download. Okay, I got it. I'm ready to do this. So the orbs in particular are rushing you through different processes. They're like your training video to be able to handle what it's going to be like when you're in those kind of situations. So on one hand, all these video games that the kids play are training them to not be restricted by the limitations of an ordinary world. Okay, I'm in this chamber now, I can fly when I'm in this chamber, or I can, have superhuman stuff or whatever. And remember that this is our avatar here. We are not this. We are something that's working through this. And in the same way, we need to be putting our avatar through certain training so that when we need it to perform a certain way, it's not going to freak out and run the other direction. So this is where the idea of pogging came from, the work in the game Diablo that both Coyote's group and EJ's group has done, where you're working as a pack of green. You should see all the green dots in the same place, moving as a group, not off in left field or someplace. So that's it just came to my mind regarding the training room, that things like those orbs, and there's other, and just even like Coyote's group does Dungeons and Dragons. So, just working through those processes are giving us the tools that we need to navigate both, these spaces that we're in supposedly physically and in the dreaming and in, our spiritual work. But the first thing Morpheus tells Nemo is that the matrix is around us all the time. It's here, it's in, and so it's very much the way that we talk about the Bardo and the labyrinth and so forth. You need to regroup yourself, or are you ready to
No,
cut it?
I've been having fun. What are you guys doing? How come there's all these people over here?
We were trying to have a discussion.
Sounds like you are. I heard words
Yes, we
and
were.
everything.
We were.
All right, we'll turn this back over
She
to
did a
you.
good job.
Oh. Hi.
He looks a little
Our
rough.
schedule is a little bit off today. By the way, these are delicious brownies.
I know.
I actually got one.
All right.
So you explained everything, what's going on, the
yeah.
hoopla.
Yeah.
I've been
Hoopla.
digging holes and leveling trailers. And
What an exciting evening.
Do this. No, both on side, both sides.
And he took off the headlamp.
Oh yeah.
oh yeah, I had the headlamp on.
Hair and makeup.
I had a headlamp, but you guys who really know what they're doing with RVs and trucks and trailers and packing and all and leveling. Oh, but they have handheld flashlights. I'm like, guys, you need headlamps. Come on.
Right.
Hands are
It's free
filthy.
here. Yeah.
So how far did you get? Did we talk about the movie yet?
Yeah, we're doing it.
We were up to the practice room.
Oh, you're up to the practice room. I took a few notes. I don't even remember what.
I was basically reading my notes, and then they were commenting and stuff. Which I
Okay.
talked about the checkerboarded floor. That was the rain is when I first became awake. As to what was happening in there, and then right after that, they showed a shot of the checkerboarded floor, and
The spiral.
and the spiral and stuff. And then we also see the checkerboarded floor when he knows the cats, the two cats.
And what was your conclusion about the checkerboarded floor?
Well, I was just explaining that comes up a lot in esoteric symbolism. You see it a lot in esoteric paintings and drawings and masonry and different places. We talked about the actual checkerboard, and that for there to be a game, there needs to be somebody playing both sides.
Right. So it's basically the same as the yin yang symbol, right?
Mhm.
What was your discussion of the spiral
Pass the water.
staircase?
Pass the water.
Sorry, I drank out of it.
Did you really? So I don't know. Did we discuss
Who else
the
online?
spiral staircase?
Oh my!
Did we discuss the spiral staircase? Not really.
Okay, we'll come back. Who else online?
No one.
No one.
No one's copying to it.
Is there any viewers?
It says one watching now.
Okay. Well, for those who will be watching, who are watching now and haven't logged in, it would be great if you could log in. If you don't want to do that, that's okay. You'll just have to listen. And for those who are watching later, yeah, we apologize that the time was off. We tried really hard to talk them into delivering earlier in the daylight. That didn't work. So, okay. So there's the whole spiral staircase thing. What did you think of the part early on when they're talking about two lives? Everyone has two lives. Did you notice that part?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it seemed pretty obvious in relationship to the Matrix, and
Mm-hmm.
the fact that you think you're having this life, and yet we keep getting glimpses of this other thing that's out there. I think that's why Nemo was searching for it, is because there's something out there that we know to be more real than this.
How many of you have had, well, obviously you're here, you're in an esoteric school, you're on an esoteric path. Think back to early in your life, as young as necessary, to where you hadn't yet become aware of the esoteric philosophies, this esoteric truth, but you knew there was something else. You remember that? Tell us about that. And go ahead and switch the camera.
Well, I remember when I was little, like playing with my hand and diffusing my vision and just playing with it all the time and bending reality and bending my mind on what's happening, seeing myself shape shift and stuff like that. So I knew that there was something else out, but that was more real than. And I was little, and so I was playing with it all my life, and that's what I've done. To me, that made more sense.
There was, when I was very small, our family was living in a town, and we were attending a church, and I was 3, and I had a Sunday school teacher, and I'd plant the kids in the Sunday school class, and who knows what the adults are doing at that time. And I really liked the teacher, and it was fun, and the kids were fun to play with. And then I turned 4 and went to another class, and the teacher was mean, and I didn't like her, and she said stuff that didn't seem right. That's just not right. I couldn't remember what I remembered or what I was supposed to be remembering, but I knew it was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So I went home to my dad. I was very upset, concerned. Dad, they said this at Sunday school class, and I don't think it's right. You go, yep, that's right. No, it's wrong. And I walked away. It's like, no, you guys are wrong. I don't know what it was, but that was probably the beginning of my awareness. And it was just a couple years later when I was in first grade that I had my great falling out with organized religion. So how many of you noticed connections to the hero's journey?
Specific references?
Yeah.
I didn't catch the hero's journey references.
Okay, so you're familiar with the hero's journey. You grow up in your normal world, and then something happens, and you realize that you're supposed to go on this thing, but you don't want to go, so you got to be tricked into it. And in a way, that was the first scene with Neo and the computer, right? He was asleep.
Mm-hmm.
And then Morpheus gets on the computer, or Trinity, or whoever it is, and lures him with stuff. What? And then he's like groggy and not awake, right? And then the knock on the door, right? So he gets lured or tempted by what showed up on the computer. So when the girl shows up with the white rabbit tattoo, and follow the white rabbit, and so he's tricked onto going on this adventure. And there's a series of trials. Some he passed, some he failed. He couldn't walk across the ledge 10 feet. And it was a dangerous ledge. I would have been reluctant.
Yeah.
Um,
Reluctant with understatement.
but cops and guns, I'm like, I might be willing to try that. What was his big mistake? This is just very practical. It's got no...
He looked down. He should never look down.
Well, that's true. That's true. But the phone, right? He should have stuck the phone in his
Mhm.
pocket and tried to use both hands.
That's what I was going.
Right. So, and then he lost his means of communication.
Right.
Right.
Mhm.
So it's like, anyway. So there's bits and pieces of that. That's kind of overlaid. It wasn't the big, most overwhelming thing, but it's in there, right? And he goes off. He has these adventures. He gets into has the major adventure, and then, of course, the Christ-like resurrection. Right? You all saw that, I'm sure. And then he's transformed, and everything he cared about before in his blue pill world. And this is it, guys. You've heard me say the red pill or the blue pill before. I referred to the blue pill world a lot
Mhm.
in blogs and speaking, in public speaking, and now you know that this is it. We make a choice, a conscious choice, and we have to make the choice. Nobody can make it for us. So he doesn't care about the blue pill stuff. It's like he's in the car. Oh, hey, I used to eat at that restaurant, right? It's like,
Mhm.
he doesn't care about it anymore. He wants to go back to the Nebuchadnezzar. Oh, the name Nebuchadnezzar. I mean, that's kind of classic mythological. He was what? The king of Babylon, right? Yeah. Named after a king of Babylon, which was the origin of society, according to some historical theories. I don't necessarily prescribe to that theory, but that's what history books say. What was the symbolism for the bug? Remember the bug? They
Yeah.
hold him down on the table, they put the thing in,
Mhm.
it crawls in, and he wakes up, he's in his room, right? And then he thinks it was all a dream,
Mhm.
which is what he was programmed to think. It's all a dream. Just ignore that stuff behind the curtain there. And then it sucks it out, right? So what did that represent?
That represented the blue pill world, the Matrix.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. And that he was, but it was a tracking thing that.
Yeah, it was tracking him. It was placed inside him deliberately. So you've probably all heard of alien implants,
Right.
things like that. Now, where I'm going with this is some countries are already doing it. They're putting microchips in it, right there, which is ironic because of all the places you could put a microchip in somebody, right there is right on a meridian, right on a very important acupuncture point,
Mhm.
which is, I don't think that was random. I think they're deliberately trying to mess people up by putting them there. So that's what the Matrix wants to do. And supposedly it's just an ID. Don't believe it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because it's going to have capabilities of gathering data, not just where you are, but what you're doing, all your biological parameters. Listening. Yeah. You put one of those in and you've given up your privacy. So I believe that was put in the movie The Matrix as a warning. Don't do that. There's quite a few issues going on in the world right now. Forced vaccinations would be one. The forced microchipping of humans would be another. Where they're issues, in my opinion, that are worth going to battle for. And by battle, I mean somebody shows up on your doorstep and says, we're here to vaccinate you and microchip you.
Smart meter.
Smart meters
Yeah.
is another one.
I was thinking the same thing.
Then it's time to shoot them. Say, no, get out of here, you're trespassing, I will shoot you. I will run you through with a spear.
Headless.
Right.
I don't
So-
like.
I'm not advocating violence except in self-defense. And in self-defense, you have every right to defend yourself. So it's a warning about the microchips that are coming. I just saw a picture this week or over the weekend, I can't remember exactly when, in the last 4 or 5 days of the country of Sweden. They're doing everybody. So, yeah, don't do that.
And most of those Swedish people are actually happy about it.
Because
I can
the
go to
Kool-Aid
work
and fluoride
scan
have
my
worked.
hand and
Yeah,
you
they're
know.
all proud of it, showing, oh, I got mine. Aren't you in the club yet?
Oh.
You know, it's a caution.
Even that though, having been to Sweden, my feeling is that that is a hoax. You know, to show the happy people, it's propaganda stuff
Of
like
course.
the Nazis and China have done to show all these happy people getting their implants. You know, when that really isn't even happening. And if it was, it's a small selective group to try
Could
to.
be. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we don't know because I'm not in Sweden and I've never been to Sweden. Bonnie's at least been to Sweden, but
Well, for example, the euro, you know, and how the big campaign to get everybody on the euro, and Britain and Ireland were a little bit iffy about it and stuff. Well, the farther up in Sweden I got, they wouldn't take no euros. You know, they weren't going to take anything other than their local money. They would only speak in their native language. You know, and so that's what makes me believe that there's this smaller group when for the most part the Swedes and the Scandinavia in general are supposed to be the happiest people, but they have this different lifestyle, you know, where they don't have the filthy rich and they don't have the super poor, and there's a nice balance in between.
what I would say, it's all out about Scandinavia, both Sweden, Norway, Denmark, all those countries up there, is that's the land of the Vikings.
Yeah.
That's the land of Beowulf.
Yeah.
The Geats and all of those guys, right? The Geats was a small country that got absorbed into
Geatland.
Geatland. And
Which is actually Zeets.
if you make them angry, if you make them angry, they've got the potential to put heads on pikes. All of Scandinavia, for 1,000 years, they were like the one place other than Scotland you didn't want to mess with. Even the Romans could be beaten with great regularity, but you didn't want to mess with them. The Romans wouldn't even go there. They tried to go to Scotland and failed. They wouldn't even go to Scandinavia. They knew better. They had scouts. They'd been visited. They said, "Nah, we don't want to go there."
Oh, didn't the Nazis try to go there? And
Well, they did. The
the
Nazis
Swedish
took
people
over
stood up against
Norway,
them.
right? They invaded. They had the country, but there was a huge active underground there, and they made life a living hell for the Nazis that were there in Norway, and eventually the Norwegians won. We helped, the British helped, we sent in commandos, we did all kinds of things, and yeah, they won. So don't mess with those guys. But any references to any famous novels you saw in this?
You know, at the
Well-
time, yeah, there were things that filtered through my brain, but I didn't write anything
One
down.
really famous novel in particular.
Alice in Wonderland.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah,
The White Rabbit. And he even refers to when the
Yeah.
red pill scene of, and I'll show you how far down the rabbit hole goes.
Yeah.
You know, he's using the Alice in Wonderland. So you could basically say this movie is an excellent adaptation of Alice in Wonderland. Which, of course, is a very shamanic movie. Altering your world by eating mushrooms. Here it's alter your world by taking the red pill. Of course, the red could very well be alluding to the Amanita muscaria mushroom, from which Santa Claus gets his red suit.
Santa eats mushrooms?
You seriously, you don't know the story?
I don't.
Oh,
We're kind of getting off track.
we'll come back to that another time.
Okay.
You all saw, I'm sure, the parallels discussion about not knowing the difference between dreaming and reality.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. These are some of the bigger picture themes that I wanted to make sure you all were. It's like we don't know because there is no difference. There's two realities. We're in one now, we're in another in the dreaming. And learning to travel back and forth between them and navigate both successfully is part of what the higher level training is about. So, I had a dream. Either this morning or yesterday. It's all a blur. Where I was helping people break out of what was either a prison or a zoo.
Same difference.
And then here, Morpheus uses the line, which I didn't even remember when I had my dream, about, and I've seen this movie half a dozen times, where he talks about, he uses the analogy of a prison and a zoo.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, wow. You looked at me funny when we were watching the movie, like, what did I...
I didn't catch it, but
Oh,
I saw
that's
you.
what it was. It's like, my dream, about the prison and the zoo. And that's kind of what it is, right? The people who are firmly in that blue pill world are stuck in a prison, stuck in a zoo, a prison of the mind, as Morpheus says at one point. And
Well, I think with the zoo analogy too, there's this aspect of, oh, this is a nice place, and you'll be taken care of here, and you'll have all your wants, met. But you're not wild, and you're not free, and you're not, in your native environment. And so it's a prison.
Yeah.
And that I think that's a big controversy with zoos right now. I saw several lines. I mean, there's all this fighting and killing and action and adventure, but when you actually just clear out all that other stuff and look at the actual lines that were said,
Mm-hmm.
almost every line individually was some kind of profound statement.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, some of the ones that I have were, you are faster than you think you are. Don't think. Let's
no.
see. No. Well, who? Yeah. No.
KNOW, yeah, no.
And then there's let go of the fear and the doubt. Free your mind. And then, one was, he was talking about these, what were the bad guys called?
The agents.
The agents. They were talking about them as gatekeepers, and I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I
They
thought,
said that they hold the keys and the something. The keys and
At every door, and
The
then
gates.
eventually you're gonna have to, at every gate or every door,
Yeah.
you're gonna have to fight them.
they hold the gates and the keys. And so
the prison guards.
it's very clear, though, that that's, with the guides that are in the Bardo as you're going through these different chambers. And, they should be there to help you, but clearly they have the keys and they're guarding the gate. And if you're not supposed to get through, you won't, according to them. So it can go both ways as far as being good and bad. I thought it was interesting, just not necessarily the Oracle in this show, but just the Oracle in general. The Oracle is a guide to find your path. So
Yeah.
just taking that as, as a statement. Let's see. He can show Morpheus can show Nemo the door, but he has to walk through it. I mean, that so totally applies to all of
Right.
this stuff that, we can be shown, but we still have to make that step. There is no spoon. I think that's the key. It was really an interesting scene to see those young little kids doing their thing, and then teaching him about it. But it's kind of like, your mind immediately goes to, okay, well, what's the way to do this? Well, the key is there is no spoon. And so as long as we keep trying to make these things real, then we're not going to get to that bending. We had just started getting into the conversation about bending.
Mhm.
Another thing was, I don't even remember where it was, but when he pointed to the plaque above on the wall,
Mhm.
it's
Know thyself.
know thyself, which is what's over the entrance to the Temple of Delphi.
Yeah.
You know, so there is all of these really ancient references there. Checkerboard flame came. How did you guys notice though? Every time they were going through some kind of a major gateway, there was a gatekeeper, and it was these like the old drunk man on the bench and stuff. And there was one early or
the
later.
blind man that wasn't blind.
Yeah. So those are more the gatekeepers that sometimes we run across. But remember, at one point, the old drunk man turned into one of the agents.
Right.
So we need to remember that they're channels, and that both good and bad can be coming through them.
Yeah, they're empty vessels.
Right.
It
So
was like
Right.
once they showed themselves that they were able to go through the phone, and he clicked like, "Whoa, that's outside the norm." And then the Smith, the agent, was able to see that someone out there had picked up on the abnormality of
right.
somebody's
Yeah,
life.
that was I thought was very key. I mean, that's with all their listening devices and whatnot and wiretapping.
They
That's
still
what
needed the human element.
Yeah.
they that's starting to go on.
Well, I think the point they brought up in the movie was whatever their superhuman abilities were, they still had to operate under the programming rules.
Right. They still had to follow the laws of gravity.
And this is what's interesting, is because when you're looking at your opponent, and knowing that they are like playing a game of chess, you have the same rules, but then there's that bending aspect, and it's almost like in Star Trek when Data wanted to know what love felt like. So here you've got this computer trying to understand human emotion.
Before he had
and-
his emotional chip.
Yeah, and being programmed, a certain way, and yet, I think in the key here, of course, is love is the answer, because that's kind of what broke through. When you called it a death and rebirth, I think.
Resurrection.
So,
Yeah.
It could also be crossing the abyss.
Yeah, it was.
In which case, crossing the abyss doesn't always mean that you've died,
Right.
but there
So
has.
that's exactly what he did.
Yeah.
Can you get to that? You
Okay.
got there. Good for you.
I really thought it was rather profound. The difference in knowing the path and walking the path.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I got
Many of the lines were very profound. The one other concept that was kind of generic has to do with like our Toltec knowledge that this is a holographic projection, right? We have a better understanding in this lineage of how that works than most esoteric traditions do. They don't even talk about this, how this is generated. But they did talk in this movie about the fact that whatever we think of as reality is just what our senses receive. So it's just electrical signals that our brain assembles. So if we change the electrical symbols, there's signals. Symbols is probably appropriate too, come to think of it. But we change the electrical signals, we change reality. This is exactly what we're trying to teach in the Toltec consciousness work. And the number one challenge is the limitations placed on our ability to do that by our mind. Oh, can't do that. I can't tell you the number of times of people, whether it was in engineering or medicine or anywhere else, was, you can't do that. I swear, if I hear anybody say, oh, you can't do that, I'm going to slap them. I was, at one point in my previous careers, president of the California State Naturopathic Association, and I was tasked as the president to come up with the theme for the 2 years I was going to be president. And so my theme was to start a campaign to eliminate all death from chronic disease within a certain period of time. And I'm talking to about a dozen people who were the board members and the fellow officers. And almost unanimously, nobody wanted to go there. Oh, we could get in trouble. Oh, the bad guys will be mean to us. Oh, all these specific political enemies will come down on us. And I was like, so you're talking about the implementation of it. And then when I pressed them, every single one of them agreed that the rationale behind my claim was true. Oh yeah, we know what causes heart disease. It can be prevented and treated. You know what causes cancer. It can be prevented and mostly treated. And on down the list of the major chronic illnesses. That was itching me. But nobody was willing to go there. There was this fear factor. And it's...
The Matrix.
Yeah, it was the Matrix that had too big a hold on them. And they're supposed to be the cutting edge leaders of the alternative. I just looked at them like, you guys are nuts. Just one example of why I'm no longer involved in that profession.
Well, it seemed like one of the keys when he decided to go back in and try to save Morpheus, they asked, well, why are you doing this? And he said, because I believe I can.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point, I don't think he believed that he was still the one who was going to be the savior,
Yeah.
So, but for some reason, he believed he could do that.
He also said because it hasn't been done before.
Okay.
Yeah, meaning they wouldn't expect it.
Right.
It was a very strategic military decision.
So I took, because it hasn't been done before, personally, to mean that anything, I could bend it.
Right.
Yeah,
Because it
maybe.
hasn't been done before.
I think the way it was intended, I think that's another way of looking at it. It's an alternative thing. I saw it the way I think the writers intended it, which was an element of surprise.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody, not even the agents, expected a rescue attempt. They felt for sure that they were just going to pull the plug and kill him, right? That he's got secrets, so we'll just kill him. They didn't understand the human emotion. They're machines. They can be programmed to pretend that they have emotion. But you'll notice that those agents, the way those actors did those jobs, and Hugo Weaving was excellent. As
They were
Agent
really
Smith.
good. That one.
Just
One
those
agent I just
deadpan
liked.
faces, not a bit of emotion. Lieutenant, my orders were for your protection. Oh, my 2 squads could take care of one little girl. And it's like, no, your men are already dead. Motionless machines. Very obvious. So that's what they couldn't predict. That's what they couldn't control. Because like Data, which is a good analogy, before he got his emotion chip, everybody knows that story, right? Okay. Another story for another day. So that's 2 now I owe you.
Write down Santa.
Santa and Data.
I don't have a pen.
The emotions you just have to go with it, right? Because militarily, going in to rescue Morpheus was the wrong decision. When you're in a revolutionary army and you get captured, it's like, okay, you're dead.
Sacrifice.
But the emotion is he's important. And it's not just for the codes he has in his brain.
Right.
It's for all his other knowledge. It's what he has done and the confidence he instills in his people for what he might do in the future. Right?
And the inspiration.
Right, and the inspiration, exactly. So they went in. I think I can do it. And it hasn't been done before, so they won't be expecting it.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
What I was gonna say about that, I didn't remember all the punchlines. It must have been a long time since I saw this. But what came to me was another, myth scenario, which is that in some traditions, when the old king was failing, you had, the up and coming whoever it was going to be, but they really couldn't do what they had to do as long as that old guy was in the way. And then, so it seemed, sometimes they were sacrificed. You had the year of the king, or what did they call it? The something king, the Sun King or whatever. So he got to be king for a year, and at the end of the year they sacrifice him. So that's kind of like a scenario of where, the old leader has to be deposed before the new leader can come in. And so it seemed rather altruistic then on Morpheus's part to put him in a position where he was going to be sacrificed. But in this particular case, it was bait to get Nemo to step up
Neo.
and do what Neo and do what he had to do.
Nemo was
A fish.
The fish.
20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Captain Nemo.
It was also Finding Nemo. The
Oh,
fish.
I'm talking about real literature, sorry. Oh, Finding Nemo.
It was an important mission.
So let's talk about your take-home message from all this.
To bend it.
No limitations.
No limitations. And the mind limits me, so
There is no spoon.
there is no spoon.
There's no limits. It's just a whole thing.
Hush.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we can create, this is kind of like, there's no limits, but we can create a new reality.
Bend the reed, like
Yeah.
Bonnie was talking about.
Well, I wasn't here for that, so I don't know what she said.
Bonnie, you wanna-
Well, it just, in one way, the story of the reed from the Toltec philosophy is that the reed will bend and not break. And then when the wind is, blowing hard, it's going to bend over and then it's going to pop back up. So sometimes it seems like we're giving up or becoming subservient or whatever, but we're bending those realities by kind of dancing and navigating and flowing through it rather than trying to crush it or be crushed.
So don't be rigid in our thinking and our belief system, and
Yeah.
and there's no rules, especially in the shamanic world.
Yeah.
There's laws, but there's not rules.
We can create a new universe. We can
Right.
create a new world. We can create the kind of world we wish we'd had when we got here, which is kind of the way I look at the concept of building the kingdom of God, which is really what they're trying to do here. I don't know if you've seen the other two that come after this. They get increasingly worse as time goes on in this series. The second movie starts out okay, but then it goes downhill, and the third one is just plain crap. So
We did talk about a little bit about Zion. And
Zion, yeah.
Zion, it's all referring to certain concepts, but we see that
Right.
come out in different ways, and we talked about the Priory of Zion and
Well, the word Zion basically means the kingdom of God. Right? That's why I mentioned that. And, in the second movie, you actually go there. It's only alluded to here. But the plots devolve quickly. Here you're saying if you throw out the fighting and just focus on what was said in this movie, every line had significance.
Right.
Yeah, I
But
wrote
it-
down quite a few of the one-liners.
By the time you get to the second, halfway through the second and all of the third, you throw out the action and the fighting, there's nothing left. There's not a single take-home spiritual message in them. And Coyote and I have actually spent some time trying to analyze those other movies, trying to find any kind of pearls at all, and I think our conclusion is there's not much there. It's not worth watching. So we're not going to do those.
So I think that's like a lot of movies. So they come up with a really good concept, and then they get greedy and want to make more money off of it by doing sequels. You know,
Oh, you
and
mean like
sequels are like never.
Star Wars! Star Wars! Star Wars! I need a drink. Star Wars! Talk about movies going into a sequel that get increasingly bad. So the take-home message is there's no limits. We can create a new reality, and we need to unbend our minds or unlimit our minds and have an imagination of what we want to see created. Because you all have homework you're working on. Of by the end of the year, you're going to pick a project that you'll be devoting a significant amount of time to, and then by the first quarter, you're going to be starting to do something to implement that. Now you see why I picked this movie now?
So we learn to remove those limits
Exactly.
and create
We're talking about creating a new
a
world
new
here.
reality.
And if you go forth with limits, preconceived, not much will change. Not much will change. However, you remove the limits, you embrace the concept that we can change our reality, everything can change. Don't worry about chaos. Chaos is our friend. All those old Get Smart TV shows where
I love
chaos
those
was the
shows.
enemy, oh, that was so wrong. Chaos is our friend. We just have to be more clever at traversing chaos than the Matrix masters, than the agents. They're just not very flexible. Powerful within those limited guidelines, but they're not flexible. You saw the look on the face is the closest thing to emotion, right at the end. When Agent Smith was showing fear, suddenly he knew what fear was when he got disintegrated.
Also, when the helicopter showed up, he growled.
Yeah, he was starting to get angry.
Yeah.
And then the other two agents just saw body parts of Agent Smith flying by. They look at each other and
they
boom!
run away.
I'm out of here. I don't know what this guy's got, but I ain't waiting around to find out. Yeah, that little scene at the climax there was definitely worth the price of admission to get there. And to have a firm grasp of no limits, we can create a new reality, and to know what the red pill, blue pill scene really means. This is the movie that gave us the red pill, blue pill scene.
And to also embrace that concept of love is one of the things that helps to remove those limitations.
Love can bring us back.
Mm-hmm.
Love can bring us back. Okay. I apologize about the universe's scheduling today, but I hope you got enough out of watching this discussion and watching the movie that it will hopefully be one of those little quantum leap aha moments in your life. And go forth, do good, avoid evil.
Prosper.
Do good, avoid evil.
Indeed.
All right, let's go offline.